For 12,000 years, the vast Galactic Empire had owned the stars, an iron grip across 1,000 systems, backed by tens of thousands of warships. Their word was law. Their power was absolute. But after 12 millennia at the top, you start to believe your own hype. On the bridge of his cruiser, the Iron Dominion, Commander Kethaval stared into the void, bored out of his mind. 60 years of service, 3 border wars, he'd seen it all, and none of it impressed him anymore. Crushing rebellions had become routine. The universe was simple. The strong rule, the weak obey. That was just gravity. His patrol of 12 warships was on babysitting duty near the Keldon Nebula, a pointless swirl of gas and dead stars. Nothing ever happened out here. It was the cosmic equivalent of a dead-end street, and Kethaval was sick of it. "Commander," his sensor tech's voice cut through the silence, "we've got an unidentified vessel entering our sector." Kethaval turned, a flicker of interest breaking his stupor. "Unidentified? Talk to me." "Its profile doesn't match a single ship in our database, sir. It's on a steady course, heading straight through the nebula." Kethaval frowned. Every species capable of building a tin can that could fly was cataloged, indexed, and usually conquered by the Vath. An unknown ship shouldn't be possible. "Put it on the main viewer," he ordered. The screen lit up, showing a vessel that was utterly alien. It was large, maybe half the size of his cruiser, with a stark, dark gray hull. The design was all function, no style, with no markings, except for a tiny symbol on its side, a small circle of blue and green. "Where did it come from?" Kethaval asked. The sensor officer worked his console. "Tracing its trajectory now, Commander. It appears to have originated from—" He stopped, his face a mask of confusion. "From the Sol system." A loud laugh echoed across the bridge. It was Lieutenant Vorsoon, the weapons officer, young and arrogant. "The Sol system?" Vorsoon scoffed. "You mean the human homeworld? Aren't those the primitives who are still figuring out how to get from their planet to its moon?" Kethaval vaguely recalled the file. The Empire had found their little world 40 years ago. A survey team had documented a species playing with chemical rockets and primitive fusion. They were slapped with a Tier 7 threat rating, the lowest possible classification. For a species so backward, they weren't even worth the fuel it would take to conquer them. The survey team had laughed at their old radio signals and their tiny space stations before moving on. Humans were a footnote, a joke forgotten in the Imperial archives. "Well, it seems the primitives finally built themselves a real ship," Kethaval said with a smirk. "How adorable. Signal the fleet. We're going to intercept this little guy and teach its crew why you don't wander into the grown-up section of the galaxy." The 12 Vath warships shifted course, moving like a pack of wolves that had just spotted a lost puppy. But the human ship didn't change a thing. It didn't speed up, slow down, or veer off course. It just kept coming, acting as if 12 massive warships converging on it were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. "They probably haven't even detected us," Vorsoon sneered. "I bet their sensors are as pathetic as the rest of their tech." "Open a hailing frequency," Kethaval ordered. "Let's give them a proper introduction." The comms officer nodded. "Channel open, Commander." Kethaval stepped forward, his voice booming with authority. "Attention, unknown vessel. This is Commander Kethaval of the Vath Imperial Navy. You have illegally entered our sovereign space. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in your immediate and total annihilation. You have 30 seconds to comply." He waited. The bridge was dead silent, every officer staring at the screen. 30 seconds came and went. The human ship just kept gliding forward, completely ignoring the ultimatum. "Maybe they don't understand the language," the comms officer offered. "Their translation software is probably junk." "Then let's speak the one language everyone understands," Vorsoon said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Commander, permission to fire a warning shot." Kethaval considered it. The ship was no threat, but ignoring a direct order was an insult that couldn't be tolerated. "Permission granted," he said. "Fire one plasma burst across their bow." A predator's grin spread across Vorsoon's face. A brilliant bolt of plasma shot across the void, passing so close to the human ship it should have rattled the fillings out of their teeth. Most crews would have surrendered on the spot. The human ship didn't so much as twitch. It just kept its course, steady as a planet in its orbit. "They're either the bravest people in the galaxy or the dumbest," Kethaval muttered. "Move us in closer. I want a full sensor scan. I want to know everything about that ship." The Iron Dominion pushed forward, its escorts spreading out to trap the intruder. The sensor officer activated the deep scan system, a piece of technology that could virtually peel the hull off any known ship and see its guts. "Scanning now, Commander," the officer said, and then paused. These initial readings, they can't be right." "What is it?" "The hull plating. Our scanners can't get a lock. It's like they can't penetrate it." The officer cranked the scanner's power to its absolute maximum. The console whined under the strain. For a few tense seconds, nothing happened. Then, data began to trickle in. The officer's face went white. His confidence vanished, replaced by a tremor in his hands. "Commander," he said, his voice barely a whisper, You need to see this." Kethaval strode over to the console. At first, the readings looked like gibberish. He figured it had to be a system malfunction, but every diagnostic came back green. The data was real. The human ship's hull was made of a material that had no name in any Vath database. It was impossibly dense, with an energy signature that was completely off the known spectrum. And deep within the ship, where the engine core should have been, the sensors detected a power source generating more energy than his entire 12-ship fleet combined. "That's impossible," Kethaval whispered. "Humans are primitives. They can't have tech like this." "Commander," his comms officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the human ship." Kethaval's mouth felt like it was full of sand. "Put it on screen." A woman's face appeared. She had dark hair and calm, intelligent eyes. She wore a simple uniform with that same blue and green circle on the shoulder. She looked directly into the camera, as if she were looking right at him, and there wasn't an ounce of fear in her expression. "Commander Kethaval," she said, her Vath accent flawless. "My name is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Navy vessel Quiet Dawn. We apologize for the delay in our response. We wanted to give you time to complete your scans." Kethaval just stared, his mind reeling. She knew their language. She knew his name. She had let them scan her ship. "You're in Imperial space without authorization," he finally managed to say, the words feeling weak and hollow. "That's a violation of galactic law." Captain Chen gave him a small, knowing smile. "We are well aware of your laws, Commander. We've been studying you for a very long time. We aren't here to cause an incident. We are here to deliver a message." "What message?" "The message is for your Emperor and the High Council. We are en route to your capital world, and we would greatly prefer for this journey to be a peaceful one." Vorsoon pushed past Kethaval, his face beet red with fury. "You dare threaten us? 1 ship against 12? We'll atomize you." Captain Chen's gaze shifted to him, and her expression was something like pity. "Lieutenant, I would strongly advise against that course of action." Her voice was still perfectly calm. "We have no desire to harm any of you, but we will defend ourselves." "Fire everything!" Vorsoon screamed, slamming his hands on the weapons console. "Vaporize them!" "Belay that order!" Kethaval roared, but he was too late. Vorsoon had already engaged the master fire control. Plasma cannons lit up the void. A swarm of missiles launched from their tubes. Lances of pure energy cut through the darkness. 12 warships unleashed all of their fury on the lone human vessel. And then, in the blink of an eye, the human ship moved. Kethaval had never seen anything move that fast. One moment it was there, and the next it was simply gone. The fleet's entire payload tore through empty space, and then the lights on the Iron Dominion's bridge went out. The hum of the engines died. The weapon systems went dark. Every single system on the ship just stopped. Red emergency lights flickered on, painting the bridge in a terrifying glow. Kethaval saw his crew, frozen at their stations in utter disbelief. "Report!" he shouted into the darkness. "What just happened?" His sensor officer stared at his dead console, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "All ships are dead in the water, Commander. All 12 of them. We're completely disabled." "How? What did they hit us with?" "I don't know, sir. There was no weapons fire, no impact, not even an energy surge. They just turned us off." On the main screen, which had flickered back to life, the human ship reappeared, floating serenely in space without a single scratch on it. Captain Chen's face filled the screen once more. "Commander Kethaval," she said, her voice as calm as a summer morning. "What if you were the top dog in the entire galaxy, only to be completely neutered in the blink of an eye? Imagine your fleet, your entire legacy, dead in space without a single shot ever being fired. That's the nightmare Commander Kethal just lived through. And the lesson he was about to learn would flip the galactic power dynamic on its head. You're going to want to stick around to see how a species everyone wrote off managed to humble the biggest bullies in the universe." A voice filled his ship. "Your systems will be back online in about 2 hours. Your crews are fine. Your ships are untouched. Please let your leaders know that humanity wants to have a conversation. We'll be waiting for you at the border." And just like that, the transmission ended. The human vessel turned and simply vanished into the void, moving like a great white shark that has never known a predator. Kethal just stared, his hands freezing, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. In 60 years of decorated service, he'd never felt terror like this. "Send a message to Imperial Command," he managed to choke out. "Tell them what happened. Tell them everything. Tell them the humans are on their way." His colossal warship, the Iron Dominion, just floated there, dead and silent, under the indifferent gaze of ancient stars. Out there in the void, humanity was ready, and the Vorath Empire was about to get a serious reality check. Admiral Vothkor had served the Empire for over a century. He had commanded fleets in 6 major wars and had personally brought 32 planets to heel. He was a legend who had never, ever known defeat. His very name was a hushed threat whispered across the star systems. But today, standing in the grand hall of Imperial Command, he felt an old, unfamiliar sensation creeping in. Uncertainty. The message from Commander Kethal had arrived 3 hours ago, a frantic, garbled plea on emergency channels because the entire patrol fleet's communication network had simply ceased to exist. The news ripped through the military's highest echelons like a plasma charge. Now, the most decorated officers in the Imperial Navy stood in a heavy, shocked silence, starving for answers that no one could provide. "Run the recording one more time," Admiral Vothkor ordered. A hologram shimmered into existence, displaying the sensor logs from the Iron Dominion. You could see the bizarre ship, the readouts that defied physics, and the precise moment 12 top-of-the-line Vorath warships were rendered completely useless without so much as a single laser burn to show for it. The officers watched on, their faces etched with dread. For some, it was their 5th time seeing the footage. It never got less horrifying. "It's got to be a system error," grumbled General Thrus, the head of the 3rd Fleet. "Sensor phantoms, a massive equipment malfunction. That border patrol is flying ancient rust buckets." "The equipment is clean," Vothkor snapped back, his voice like ice. 3 separate diagnostic teams verified the data. What we're seeing is real." "Then make it make sense," Thrus boomed. "Humans are primitives. They were a Tier 7 species just 40 years ago, barely splitting the atom. They were still launching chemical rockets. It is physically impossible for them to have developed this kind of technology in 4 decades. And yet," a calm voice sliced through the tension from the far side of the room, "the facts suggest otherwise." Every single head swiveled in that direction. High Minister Zelton stepped out from the shadows. He was ancient, even by Vorath standards, and had been the head of Imperial intelligence since before most of the officers in the room were even born. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes held a profound worry that made Vothkor's gut twist into a knot. "What aren't you telling us, Minister?" Vothkor asked. Zelton glided toward the hologram and pressed a control. The image flickered, replaced by a stunningly blue planet orbiting with a single lonely moon. 40 years ago, he began, our deep space survey team entered their star system. They observed humanity for 3 days, scanning their cities and their laughably primitive spacecraft. They analyzed their broadcasts and their technology. The conclusion of the report was that humans were millennia behind us. They were insignificant, totally harmless. He pressed another button, and the view pulled back to show their whole solar system. Following standard protocol for uninteresting new species, the team left a single spy drone behind. It was programmed to observe and send a status report every 5 years. "I've seen those reports," Thrus grunted. "A whole lot of nothing. The humans were still messing around in the dirt, putting up a few more orbital stations, launching little probes to their gas giants. Nothing worth mentioning." "Correct," Zelton said smoothly. "That is what the reports told us, but 3 days ago we finally went to retrieve the drone itself. It had stopped transmitting 2 years ago. We assumed it had simply malfunctioned. We dispatched a ship to collect the wreckage." He paused, and the massive hall fell so silent you could hear the air recyclers hum. The drone was in perfect working order. Its transmitter had been deliberately disabled. Someone had discovered it, reverse-engineered it, and shut it off. But they made one mistake. They let its recording systems continue to run. The hologram changed again, displaying a scene that made every single decorated officer in that room collectively hold their breath. Earth and its moon were still there. But stretched between them was a breathtaking network of shipyards. Hundreds of them, gargantuan, glowing structures, each one dwarfing the largest construction facility the Vorath had ever conceived. And docked within those shipyards, thousands of warships were being churned out at a speed that defied belief. The recording continued, showing massive fleets launching and assembling in the dark void behind the moon, hiding where no one would ever bother to look. They were just waiting, silent and still, like a pride of lions gathering for a hunt. "The humans found our drone 23 years ago," Zelton said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't smash it. They didn't alert us. They took it apart piece by piece. They learned our language from its databanks. They learned our technology from its schematics. They learned our fleet formations from its tactical archives. They turned our own intelligence into a weapon against us." "It's even worse," Vathkor breathed. "That hull material on their ship, our labs analyzed the readings. It's based on a composite we abandoned 6,000 years ago because we couldn't stabilize it. The humans must have found our failed research in the drone's archives and figured out how to perfect it." General Thrus looked pale, like he was about to be sick. "How many?" he croaked. "How many ships have they built?" "Based on this footage, our analysts estimate that humanity has constructed a minimum of 8,000 warships in the last 4 decades. Every single one of them is a match for our capital ships, and many appear to be far superior." 8,000? Thrus's voice broke. "The entire Imperial Navy only has 12,000 ships. And half of those are support vessels and freighters," Vathkor added, his voice grim. "Our actual combat-ready fleet number's only 5,000. "Indeed," Zelton confirmed. "And the humans are aware of that too. They've been studying our fleet deployments. They've mapped our territories. They know precisely where our ships are stationed and exactly how long it would take for us to mount any kind of defense." Admiral Vathkor felt like the floor had just vanished. His entire understanding of the galaxy, the fundamental rule that the strong dominate the weak, was a complete fabrication. Humanity was supposed to be weak. They weren't weak any longer. "But why?" he asked, his voice raw with disbelief. "Why build all of this in total secrecy?" "Because they remembered our visit," Zelton replied. "They remembered our survey team looking down on them with contempt, dismissing them as irrelevant. They remembered us laughing at their little chemical rockets and leaving their world without so much as a formal greeting. They made a collective decision right then and there that no one in the galaxy would ever look down on them like that again." At that exact moment, a communications officer ran into the hall, his face white as a sheet. "Admiral, we have an incoming transmission from the human ship at the border." "Put it on the main screen," Vathkor commanded. The hologram shifted once more, and a human face materialized, the very same woman from the patrol fleet recording. "Greetings," she said, her expression perfectly calm and unreadable. "My name is Ambassador Sarah Chen, and I represent the United Earth Confederacy. I am authorized to speak for all of humanity." "Ambassador?" Vathkor's mind reeled. She had identified herself as a captain before. The military title was just a cover. This wasn't the start of an invasion. It was a formal first contact. "We understand that our sudden arrival may have caused some concern," Chen went on. "That was not our intention. We are not here to issue threats or make demands. We are here to talk." "Talk about what?" Vathkor shot back. "About the future," she said simply. "About the possibility of peace. About a potential partnership between our two species." She paused for a beat. "And about something else. A coming threat that will endanger us both. But that is a conversation for your emperor and your high council, not one to be had over an open military channel. We will await your response at the border." The screen went dead. The officers just stood there, completely dumbfounded. General Thrus was the first to find his voice. "It's a trick. They're trying to lull us into a false sense of security before they strike." "And to what end?" Zelton asked, his voice steady. "They already hold all the cards. If they wanted a war, they wouldn't need to play games. They could have simply steamrolled us." "Then what is it they want?" Thrus yelled. "Perhaps," Zelton suggested, "they want precisely what she said they want, a conversation." Admiral Vathkor stared at the empty hologram where Sarah Chen's face had been. She hadn't displayed a hint of arrogance or malice, only a quiet, unwavering strength, and that was more terrifying than any weapon he had ever encountered. "We need to inform the Emperor," he said finally. "This is far beyond our authority." He turned and walked toward the grand doors, the other officers shuffling behind him like lost children. On the hologram they left behind, the image of Earth's massive, silent shipyards hung in the air. Thousands of warships, waiting patiently in the dark, built by a people the Empire had dismissed as primitives. For his entire life, Vathkor had believed that true power grew from the barrel of a plasma cannon. But as he walked through the hallowed halls of Imperial Command, he started to wonder if he'd been wrong about everything. The humans had built a power that dwarfed his own wildest dreams, and the very first thing they chose to do with it was ask to talk. One question was about to shatter a galactic empire. It's the same question that was echoing in Emperor Vorath Thurto's mind as he walked into his council chambers. What kind of species builds a fleet capable of wiping out star systems, and then asks to talk? A tiny voice inside him whispered that these humans knew something his people didn't, a secret that could change the very fabric of the universe. And the answer is going to change everything, so you'll definitely want to see this through. As the massive doors sealed behind him, the chamber fell silent. And light years away, humanity waited with a chilling patience for the Empire's response. The Imperial Council hadn't seen chaos like this in 3,000 years. The most powerful figures in the Vorath Empire were shouting at each other like merchants in a crowded market. Raw, unfiltered fear had torn their dignity to shreds. Blind panic had replaced their usual composure. Their entire galaxy was teetering on the edge of a cliff, and not a single one of them knew how to stop the fall. Emperor Vorath Thurto watched the meltdown from his throne. He was ancient, his scales faded to a pale gray, but his mind was as sharp as ever. In his 200 years as emperor, he'd seen it all: brutal wars, deadly plagues, bloody rebellions. He had always, without fail, found a path to protect his empire. But this was something else entirely. This was a kind of terror he didn't even have a word for. "We have to attack now," roared Grand Marshal Thrawn, slamming a fist on the great table. "Every second we hesitate, the humans grow stronger. We need to gather the whole fleet and smash them before they get any closer." "And what fleet would that be?" Admiral Bethor snapped back. "We have maybe 5,000 ships truly ready for combat. They have at least 8,000, and their technology is generations ahead of ours. We all saw the report. One of their ships took out 12 of ours without breaking a sweat. One ship." Then we use our sheer numbers, Thrawn bellowed. We'll hit them from every direction at once. We will overwhelm them. You would sacrifice half our navy in a battle we are destined to lose, High Minister Zelthan interjected, his voice cold as the void. The humans are not fools. They've been observing our tactics. They will anticipate our every move before we even think of it. So what's your brilliant idea? Surrender? Just bow down to these primitives? They are not primitives. The voice came from the back of the room. Every head swiveled to see Scholar Yella, the most senior member of the Academy of Sciences, slowly rising to her feet. She seemed frail, almost fragile, yet her eyes burned with an incredible fire. They never were. We were simply too arrogant to notice. She started walking toward the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the sudden deafening silence. For the last 2 days, I have reviewed every piece of information we have on humanity, their history, their culture, everything, and I have reached a conclusion that terrifies me to my very soul. Then speak, the Emperor ordered. Yella bowed slightly. 40 years ago, when we first discovered Earth, we saw a species at war with itself, fractured into hundreds of nations, killing each other over land and beliefs. We saw their polluted planet, their constant violence, and their clumsy machines. We called them weak because they weren't unified. We called them primitive because they hadn't even conquered their own solar system. We judged them by our own measure of success, and we never once considered that they might have a different one. What other measure is there? Thrawn scoffed. Patience, for one, Yella responded, and perhaps the wisdom to know that a species can be dangerous not for its current power, but for its potential. She pressed a control, and the main display screen lit up with images from Earth. Old footage flickered across the screen, showing scenes of absolute horror. Cities turned to rubble, millions of casualties. Humanity has fought more wars against itself than our empire has fought in our entire 12,000-year history, she stated. They have survived genocide, nuclear fire, and the complete collapse of their ecosystem. They have brought themselves to the very edge of extinction, time and time again, always by their own hands. And every single time, they survived, they rebuilt, they learned, they became stronger. The images on the screen changed, showing something different. Gleaming new cities rising from ruins, old enemies shaking hands, former soldiers working side by side to build a better world, monuments not to warriors, but to peace. They remember their mistakes, Yella said quietly. They teach their young about the darkness in their own past, praying the next generation will make a better choice. When our scouts first saw them 40 years ago, humanity was in the middle of its greatest transformation. For the first time in their history, they were learning to be one people. United to fight us? Thrawn growled. Perhaps. Or perhaps just united, Yella said, looking directly at the Emperor. They could have attacked us at any moment in the last decade. They had the ships, the technology, the advantage of surprise. But they didn't. They sent a single ship, just one, to deliver a message. They disabled our patrol fleet without causing a single death. They asked for a peaceful dialogue. She paused, letting her words sink in. Your Majesty, these are not the actions of a conqueror. These are the actions of a species that understands the true price of war and has absolutely no desire to pay it again. The room was completely still. The Emperor sat on his throne like a stone carving, his ancient eyes fixed on the images of humanity's violent yet beautiful history. You believe they genuinely want peace? He finally asked. I believe they want something, Yella replied. What that is, I cannot guess. But I do believe we should listen to what they have to say before we condemn our empire to a war we very well may not survive. Grand Marshal Thrawn leaped to his feet. This is madness. The empire does not bargain with lesser species. We have never shown weakness. If we entertain this meeting, every race we govern will see it as a sign that we are weak, an invitation to rebel. And if we fight the humans and lose, we won't have an empire left for them to rebel against, Zelthan pointed out calmly. The shouting erupted once more. Accusations and insults flew across the chamber. The fear in the room was so thick it was hard to breathe. And then A new voice sliced through the noise. "Silence!" Everyone froze. A communications officer was standing at the chamber entrance, his face as white as a ghost. "What is it?" the Emperor demanded. "The human ship, Your Majesty. It has moved. It's now holding a position just at the edge of our core systems. And it's not by itself." He hit a command on his datapad. The main screen changed. A tactical map of the border flashed into view, and what they saw on that map made every single heart in the room stop. The lone human ship was now joined by thousands of others. An entire fleet had materialized from nowhere, creating a silent wall of metal across the border. 8,000 warships sitting in perfect formation, just there. "They jumped," Bethor whispered, his voice filled with horror. "They have faster-than-light technology we can't even detect. They moved their entire armada, and we didn't see a single thing." "And yet, they are holding their position," Yella observed. "They aren't advancing. They are not firing. They are simply waiting." As if on cue, a transmission came through. The screen switched to Ambassador Sarah Chen. She was on the bridge of her flagship, wearing the same calm expression as before. Behind her, through a giant viewport, the human fleet stretched out like a galaxy of its own. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a small bow. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. My government believed it was necessary to show you just how serious we are. We have no intention of using this fleet. We have no desire for war, but we needed you to understand that we are approaching you as equals, not as subjects." She stood up straight, her eyes locking with the Emperor's. "We are asking again for a meeting. We are not here to make demands or threats. We are here to have a conversation. I will come to your border station by myself. No weapons, no guards. I will place myself entirely in your hands as a gesture of our good faith." "Why?" the Emperor asked, the single word escaping his lips before he could stop it. "You have the clear advantage. You could annihilate us. Why are you asking for peace?" Ambassador Chen's face softened and a flicker of ancient sorrow passed through her eyes. "Because we have destroyed before," she said softly. "We have burned our own worlds and killed billions of our own people. We fought wars that brought us nothing but pain. We learned the hard way that there is no glory in conquest, no honor in destruction. There are only ashes and graves, and the unbearable weight of regret." She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was like steel. "We didn't build this fleet to conquer you. We built it to make certain no one could ever dismiss us again. We built it so that when we asked for peace, we would be listened to. We did not come here to start a war, Your Majesty. We came here to end one before it even has the chance to begin." The transmission ended. The chamber was dead silent. 8,000 human warships hung in the void, waiting for an answer. Emperor Vorath Thurto looked at his council, at the utter terror on their faces. He thought about the 12,000 years of his empire, of conquest and power, of the belief that strength was defined by the ability to destroy. And then he thought about a species that had learned, through unimaginable agony, that true strength was having the power to choose peace instead. "Send a signal to the border station," he said at last, his voice carrying through the great hall. "Inform the human ambassador that I will meet with her personally, and tell our fleet to stand down, for now." The council burst into an uproar, but the Emperor raised one hand and they immediately fell quiet. "I am old," he said softly. "I've ruled for 2 centuries. I know what war does to a civilization. If there is even the slightest chance, any chance at all, to avoid that outcome, I'm going to take it. Prepare for the meeting." He rose from his throne and walked toward the doors. Behind him, an empire stood on the verge of a new era, and out in the darkness, humanity waited, with open hands and patient hearts. Have you ever been told you're nothing? Just a bunch of primitives, not even worth talking to? Now imagine showing up 40 years later with a fleet that literally blots out the stars. That's exactly what humanity did, and what happened next is going to change how you think about power forever. So you're definitely going to want to stick around. For 3,000 years, the Imperial Border Station had been the ultimate symbol of Vorath might, a fortress floating in the silent darkness between galaxies. Its cannons could vaporize entire fleets, and its shields could withstand sieges for months on end. No one was ever stupid enough to even think about attacking it. But now, that mighty fortress was completely dwarfed by 8,000 human warships hanging silently in perfect formation, their dark hulls just soaking up the light from distant suns. They didn't make a move. They didn't issue a threat. They just waited, like a hurricane deciding when to finally make landfall. From the observation deck, Admiral Vothkor watched them. His own fleet of 2,000 Vorath warships assembled behind him. These were the best ships the Empire had, called in from every corner of their territory. And next to the human fleet, they looked like little toy boats in a bathtub. "The Emperor's shuttle is en route," his aide reported. "He should arrive at the neutral meeting point in about 20 minutes. Vothkor just gave a slight nod, his eyes glued to the viewscreen. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the human ships. Their design was brutally simple. No elegant curves, no decorations, no wasted space. Every single line on those hulls was designed for one thing, and one thing only. They were weapons made real, forged by a species that understood war in a way the Vorath had thankfully forgotten. "Admiral," his aide said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "you have to see this." He held out a data tablet. Vothkor took it, and an icy chill ran down his spine. "These are scans from their flagship, the one they're calling the Patient Hand," the aide explained. "Our sensors finally got a glimpse past its outer hull." The figures on the screen were simply impossible. The ship's power core was generating more energy than the station's entire network of reactors combined. Its weapons were on a whole different level, and its shields, if this data was even close to accurate, could take a direct hit from the station's main cannon without even flickering. "One ship," Vothkor whispered, his voice cracking. "One of their ships could take out this entire station by itself." "Yes, Admiral. And they brought 8,000 of them." Vothkor handed the tablet back. His hands were as steady as stone, but inside, a lifetime of absolute certainty had just been shattered into a million pieces. His faith in the unbeatable Vorath Empire was crumbling with every impossible number he read. In the quiet void between the two massive fleets, a pair of small shuttles approached each other. One was a magnificent Vorath vessel, carrying Emperor Vorath himself along with his honor guard. The other was a plain, unarmed human transport. It carried only one person, Ambassador Sarah Chen. They both docked at a tiny neutral platform that had been built just for this meeting. The Emperor stepped out first, flanked by 20 of his most elite guards, all decked out in the ancient heavy gold and crimson armor of their ancestors, a symbol of 12,000 years of uninterrupted rule. Ambassador Chen emerged completely alone. She was wearing a simple gray uniform with no medals, no ribbons, and no weapons. She walked straight toward the Emperor, her steps steady and calm, without a hint of fear on her face. She stopped at a respectful distance and offered a small bow. "Your Majesty," she said, "thank you for agreeing to see me." The Emperor looked her up and down. She was so tiny compared to a Vorath, almost fragile. Her entire lifespan was probably just a blink of an eye to him, and yet the way she stood there, looking at him, it wasn't like a servant before a king. It was like she was looking at an equal. "You have certainly made quite an entrance, Ambassador," the Emperor said, his voice a deep rumble. "My empire hasn't felt a shake-up like this in 3,000 years. "That was never our intention, Your Majesty," she replied smoothly. "Fear just leads to bad decisions. We wanted to have a clear, honest conversation without any of that background noise." "And the 8,000 warships are just to add a little emphasis, I take it?" "The 8,000 warships are here because you wouldn't have bothered to listen otherwise," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "When your scouts visited Earth 40 years ago, they laughed at us. They called us primitives. They left without a single word of greeting or trade or diplomacy. They decided we were beneath your notice." The Emperor said nothing. He remembered that report. He remembered signing off on it, agreeing with its dismissive conclusion. He hadn't given humanity a single thought from that day to this one. We got the message, Chen continued. We learned that in this galaxy, the weak are ignored, and the strong get a seat at the table. We realized that if we ever wanted you to actually hear us, we had to earn that right. So we built, we learned, we prepared, and now we're here, ready to talk as equals. Grand Marshal Kethron, a fiery warrior who had accompanied the Emperor, stomped forward. Equality! You people have only been flying between stars for a few decades. Equality is earned over millennia. Yeah. No, Chen said, her voice remaining perfectly level. We demonstrated our power to ensure our words would be heard. We aren't demanding equality. We are asking for your understanding. She turned her gaze back to the Emperor. Your Majesty, I have a request, and it might sound insane after this show of force. All we ask is that you watch what our fleet does next, and after that, just listen to what we have to say. Watch what? The Emperor demanded. A demonstration, she replied. With your permission, I will order our fleet to fire upon your station. The Emperor's guards immediately raised their weapons. Kethron drew his ceremonial blade, but the Emperor held up a hand, stopping them all. You want to attack my station, to prove you can destroy us? No, Your Majesty, she said. To prove that we could, but that we choose not to. Something in her tone, a profound sadness he couldn't quite identify, made him pause. Proceed, he commanded. Chen tapped a small device on her wrist. All ships, execute Pattern 7, single volley. Back on the station's bridge, Admiral Vothkor saw the human fleet light up. 8,000 ships moved as one, their weapon ports glowing with a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull and right into his bones. All hands, brace for impact, he yelled. Shields to maximum! And then the humans fired. It was a perfectly synchronized storm of light and energy, beams brighter than any sun, projectiles moving faster than thought, and waves of raw power that could crack planets. The station's shields flared to life as they absorbed the first wave, then the second. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The bombardment ceased. The station was perfectly fine. The shields had held. There wasn't a single scratch on the hull. Vothkor stared at his monitors, completely bewildered. They missed, he breathed out. Every single shot missed. No, Admiral, his sensor officer whispered, his voice trembling. They hit us. Every shot made contact. Their weapons were calibrated to the precise frequency our shields could handle. They calculated our defensive capacity down to the last joule and matched their attack perfectly. They hit us with their full arsenal, but they fine-tuned it to do zero actual damage. The truth washed over Vothkor like a tidal wave of ice. The humans hadn't failed. They had sent a message. They had proven they could touch the station without breaking it. They could literally decide, with perfect precision, who lived and who died. And in that moment, they had chosen to let every single one of them live. On the platform, Ambassador Chen watched the Emperor's face as the reports began flooding his earpiece. She saw the shock, the disbelief, and then the slow, dawning comprehension. The fear in his eyes began to fade, replaced by something that looked an awful lot like awe. If we had wanted you gone, she said softly, you would be. Your station, your fleet, this entire empire. We ran the simulations. We know exactly how this war would end. She took a step closer, her voice lowering to an almost personal level. We spent 40 years becoming capable of wiping you out completely. And then we spent another 40 years learning how not to. Because we've been destroyers before, Your Majesty. We've burned our own world. We've butchered our own people. We know what victory tastes like, and it tastes like ash in your mouth. She reached out and gently placed a hand on his armored forearm. It was a gesture so shockingly bold it would have been a capital offense just moments earlier. We came here with the power to conquer you, she said. But we're offering you something else instead. A choice. We can be partners, or we can be enemies. We can build a future together, or we can fight. We will respect your decision, whatever it may be. But we needed you to understand that when we offer peace, it is not a sign of weakness. We are not begging. We are offering it as an equal. The emperor was silent for a very long time. His guards were frozen in place. Grand Marshal Kethron looked like he was about to have a heart attack, but the emperor had lived for 300 years. He knew the truth when he heard it. "Why?" he finally asked. "You possess this unbelievable power. Why offer peace?" Ambassador Chen gave him a sad, knowing smile. "Because power isn't the point, Your Majesty. We learned that lesson the hard way, standing in the ruins of our own cities and on the graves of our own children." She looked at him, and for a brief moment, he could see the entire weight of human history in her eyes. Every war, every mistake, and every painful step they took to become better. "We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want a safe place to live in it. And there's one more thing. Something is coming from the deep dark, something that threatens all of us, and we would much rather face it with friends by our side. We'll circle back to that. Right now I only need one thing from you, an open mind." The emperor's expression was a stone mask. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, before he finally glanced at his personal guard. "Stand down," he commanded, the order echoing off the chamber walls. "Get the council on the comms. Inform them I'm returning to the capital, and the ambassador is my guest." His eyes locked back onto Chen. "It seems we have a great deal to discuss, Ambassador. I truly hope, for the sake of both our peoples, that you're being straight with me." "That makes two of us, Your Majesty," she answered, her voice unwavering. "That makes two of us." Together, they walked toward the shuttle, a ship destined for the very heart of the Vorith Empire. Two species, separated by light years in evolution, suddenly connected by the most fragile thread imaginable: hope. The Imperial throne room was more than just a space. It was the soul of the Vorith civilization. Its walls were hewn from the living rock of their lost homeworld, a planet that now existed only in legend. The ceiling vanished into an artificial night sky, and the floor was an intricate mosaic, each tile bearing the name of an emperor from their 12,000-year dynasty. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked the length of this sacred hall, the imposing Emperor Barath of Frink at her side. Behind them, the entire Imperial Council followed, their shock palpable in their rigid silence. And at the far end, the throne itself waited, a colossal seat of authority from which the fate of the galaxy had been decided countless times. This entire spectacle had been the Emperor's idea, and his alone. He wanted his council to hear this human story with their own ears. He needed them to feel the ground shifting beneath their feet, just as he was beginning to feel it himself. Chen paused before the throne, turning to address the gathered lords and ministers of the galaxy's most dominant empire. She stood alone, having politely declined the offer of a security detail. Here, in the den of the lions, her only weapon was her voice. "You asked why we came seeking peace," she began, her words crisp and clear. "You demanded to know why a species with our power would choose cooperation over conquest. I'm here to give you that answer. But first, you need to understand something about a small world called Earth." She touched a device on her wrist. A hologram bloomed in the air above her, showing a swirl of blue and white, a fragile jewel hanging in the velvet dark of space. 300 years ago," she said, "humanity nearly drove itself into extinction. We built weapons that could shatter continents. We fielded armies so massive they scarred the face of our planet. We divided ourselves by flags, by beliefs, by the color of our skin, and we told ourselves those divisions were worth dying for." The hologram warped, the serene blue planet replaced by visions of hell. Cities became infernos, atomic fire blossomed over fields, and the dead were left unburied in the streets. We fought wars that cost us hundreds of millions of souls. We poisoned our skies, choked our oceans, and burned our own lands. We came within a single afternoon of total annihilation. And why? For pride, for paranoia, for the monumentally arrogant idea that we were right and everyone else was wrong. The council members shifted, their legendary composure cracking. They had read the reports on human savagery, but seeing it raw and unfiltered was a different experience. This wasn't a statistic, this was a warning. "And in the end, we just stopped," Chen continued, her voice softening to a hush. "Not because of some grand revelation. We stopped because we were standing in the ruins of everything we'd ever loved, and we could finally feel its weight. We looked at the faces of our lost children and were forced to ask if any ideology, any piece of territory, was worth that price. She let the question hang in the colossal room. The answer was no. That was the day we began to change. It was a process that took generations. It demanded sacrifice and compromises that tore us apart. But the hardest step was forgiveness. We had to forgive our enemies for what they did to us. And just as difficult, we had to forgive ourselves for what we had become. We had to build something new on a foundation of ash. She locked her gaze with the Emperor. 40 years ago, when your scouts first found us, we were in the middle of that transformation. You saw us as a primitive race, Your Majesty. You were mistaken. We weren't primitive, we were a species in recovery. And when we saw the contempt in your envoy's eyes, the dismissal, it made us realize a critical truth. She straightened her shoulders, her voice resonating with purpose. We realized the galaxy was still playing by the same savage rules that nearly destroyed us. The strong dominate the weak. The powerful take what they want. Violence is the only currency that matters. We looked at your great empire, and we saw the ghost of our own past staring back at us, a past we had fought with every fiber of our being to escape. Grand Marshal Catherine, a mountain of a man in full military regalia, stepped forward, his face a thundercloud of rage. "That is an outrageous insult! The Vorith Empire brought order to 1,000 worlds! We ended endless wars! We created stability!" "You're absolutely right," Chen conceded smoothly. "You did it through overwhelming force, through conquest, by making every other species so terrified of you that they wouldn't dare step out of line. It's certainly one way to create peace, but it's not the only way. And the peace you've built is a fortress made of glass." She turned to face him directly. "Your subjects don't follow you out of loyalty. They obey you out of fear. The moment you show the slightest weakness, they will tear you apart. The instant a greater power appears, your empire will shatter into 1,000,000 warring pieces. You've built a civilization on fear, Marshal, and fear is the most unstable foundation in the universe." Catherine's hand dropped to the hilt of his sidearm, but the Emperor's voice sliced through the air. "Let her finish, Marshal. I will hear this." Chen inclined her head in thanks. "Your Majesty, I'm not trying to offend you. I'm trying to warn you, because something is coming that fear cannot defeat." The hologram changed again, displaying a map of the galaxy. From the far edge, an inky blackness was spreading inward like a creeping cancer. Our astronomers detected it 30 years ago. We call it the Hollow. It is a wave of pure, absolute annihilation moving toward us from the great void between galaxies. We don't know what it is. A natural disaster, an ancient superweapon, or some life form beyond our comprehension. "The only thing we know for certain," she said, as a wave of murmurs swept through the throne room, "is that it is on its way, and it will arrive in approximately 200 years. To an empire that measured its own age in millennia, 200 years was the blink of an eye." "Our scientists ran every simulation imaginable," Chen stated. "If the Hollow arrives to find this galaxy fractured and fighting itself, the result is simple and unavoidable. We all get wiped out, one system at a time. Your magnificent empire, with all its warships, will be erased. Humanity, with our powerful technology, will be erased. If we stand alone, we all fall." She let the chilling finality of her words settle. "But if we stand together, our combined science, our shared resources, our united will to survive, if we stand together, we might just have a chance. That's why we built the fleet, Your Majesty. It wasn't to conquer you or to threaten you. It was to make sure that when we showed up offering a partnership, you'd actually take us seriously." The Emperor rose slowly from his colossal throne. He walked down the steps, one by one, until he was standing right in front of the human ambassador. She looked so tiny, so fragile, next to his towering frame. But she didn't so much as blink. "You're asking us to trust you," he rumbled, his voice like shifting continents. To believe that a species we've only just met is offering a genuine alliance. To accept that this insane threat you speak of is real, and that working together is our only hope. I'm just asking you to think about it, Chen said, her voice perfectly calm. Look at our claims, run the data for yourselves, and then make your own decision. We don't need an answer right now. We've already been waiting for 40 years. We can wait a little longer. And what if our answer is no? The Emperor shot back. What if we decide the Empire will handle this threat on its own? Chen's expression never changed. Then we'll defend ourselves if you decide to attack, and we'll get ready for the Hollow by ourselves. We won't force you to work with us. If we did that, we'd become the very conquerors we're trying not to be. She took a quiet breath. But I really hope you don't say no. I hope that when you see what we've done, building a massive fleet just for defense, showing you our power without firing a single shot, and coming to you with open hands instead of weapons drawn, you'll see something you can believe in. We are offering you something this galaxy has never seen, Your Majesty. A real partnership, between equals, a future built on cooperation, not on domination. The giant throne room went completely still. Every single eye was glued to the Emperor. His next few words would seal the fate of trillions of lives. He thought about the 12,000-year history of his empire. He thought of all the species his ancestors had crushed, the worlds they had seized, and the power they had hoarded. He thought about that foundation of fear Chen had talked about, and deep down, he knew she was right. He'd seen with his own eyes how fast loyalty disappears when power starts to fade. And then he thought of the Hollow, that silent, creeping darkness that was coming to devour everything they had ever built. I have been the Emperor for 200 years, he said finally. My decrees have touched the lives of trillions, but never, not once, have I faced a choice of this magnitude. He looked at his council. We have two paths before us. We can cling to our old ways, ruling through fear, domination, and isolation. We can act like nothing has changed and simply wish that both the humans and the Hollow vanish. Or we can take an unbelievable leap of faith. We can dare to believe these humans are who they claim to be. We can forge something new, side by side. He turned his gaze back to Chen. I'm choosing the second path. I'm choosing an alliance. It's not because I have complete faith in you. I don't. It's because I witnessed what you were capable of and you deliberately held back. That choice, that act of restraint, is something I haven't witnessed in 12,000 years of galactic history. And that's a gamble worth taking. He extended his enormous hand, mimicking the human gesture of greeting his advisors had taught him. Ambassador, welcome to the Vorith Empire. Let's get to work building something better. Chen grasped his hand, her own feeling surprisingly strong and warm. Your Majesty, I promise, this is a decision you won't regret. A year later, the galaxy had transformed into a place no one would have recognized. Human and Vorith fleets flew together in joint training exercises. Scientists from both races collaborated in labs, sharing discoveries and technologies. The Empire's vassal species, once controlled by terror, received a new proposition: partnership instead of subjugation, cooperation instead of obedience. Some worlds decided to remain, while others chose to declare their independence. And for the first time in 12,000 years, no one was punished for their choice. The newly established joint fleet patrolled the frontier territories, acting as a shield against raiders and a defense against the encroaching Hollow. Its human captain, Sarah's nephew James Chen, stood on the bridge, observing the star-dusted panorama drift past. Beside him, a Vorith officer named Vathkor the Younger, son of the admiral who had first spotted the human fleet's arrival, studied the tactical displays. He grew up hearing tales of that day, the astonishment, the terror, and the impossible choice that followed. Do you honestly believe we can stop them? Vathkor asked in a low voice. The Hollow, that is, he added. Are we truly powerful enough? Captain Chen thought it over for a moment. To be honest, I don't know, he replied. No one does. But what I do know is this. Just 1 year ago, our two peoples were on the verge of wiping each other out. Now, we're standing here together, ready to face the darkness as partners. Whatever happens from here on out, That fact alone is a victory. He looked at the ships surrounding them, Vorith and human craft flying in flawless formation, their crews working as a single cohesive unit. My aunt used to say that humanity's greatest strength wasn't our technology or our battleships. It was our ability to change, to confront our own worst tendencies and choose a better way. Maybe that's what will see us through. It won't be the weapons we've made, but the conscious decision we made to use them for protection instead of conquest. Vathkor nodded, letting the idea sink in. Your species is strange, human. You hold the power to dominate, yet you seek cooperation. You have the might to destroy, yet you offer mercy. I admit, I don't fully grasp it. Captain Chen gave a slight smile. Sometimes we don't either, but we never give up trying. And really, that's all any of us can do. The fleet pushed forward into the blackness, its engines streaking trails of light across the vast emptiness. Behind them, 1,000 planets held their breath, suspended between hope and dread. Ahead, the great unknown awaited. But now, for the very first time, they were not facing it by themselves. Human and Vorith united. Former adversaries were now steadfast allies. Two civilizations, each bearing the scars of its own brutal past, were now aiming for a future that neither could have achieved alone. And somewhere in the silent void between galaxies, the Hollow pressed on with its unyielding advance. It had no concept of fear. It knew nothing of mercy. Its only purpose was to consume and to spread the dark. But for the first time in billions of years, something different was standing in its path. Something that had figured out how to turn swords into shields and enemies into comrades. Something that had chosen, against all instinct and the weight of history, to place its trust in the chance for peace. Humanity had made its entrance, and the galaxy was forever changed.